Hey everybody, welcome to U1-L9 Background to Islam and Argo. So, if you had me last year for world history, which a couple of you had, you're probably like, wow, this slideshow's gonna look slightly familiar. It does, but it's always a great refresher. Or if you have me in world history right now, you'll have this, think in Unit 6? I don't know. Alright, let's go. So, learning goals. Students can describe the rise and significance of Islam in Southwest Asia and its expansion and institutionalization in other regions. So, your job today, you're going to watch this Ed puzzle and answer the questions that pop up. Questions that I want you to answer on the Ed puzzle will be in blue text. And the answers I want you, or the questions that I want you to answer on your study guide, like write down the answer to your study guide, will be in magenta text. So just FYI, I know talking about religion can be kind of a tricky subject in public schools, but I will just tell you this. I'm going to be sticking to teaching how Islam came about, basic beliefs, and historical facts. Okay, we're not going to get into anything like super crazy. And I'm not here to influence you or tell you what is right or wrong, and what you choose to believe is your choice. I'm just giving you the history of it. All right, so let's get started. So before we talk about Islam, we got to talk about its origins. And the origins really start in Judaism. So there's really, let's hear. So Judaism started in about 2000 BCE, and that of course varies on some sources. And it is a monotheistic religion. Its important messenger is Abraham. He is considered the first Jewish person. The holy text includes the Hebrew Bible, which includes the Torah, and the Christian Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible have the majority of the same text. So a lot of that text overlaps. And then from Judaism sprang Christianity. So that started about 33 CE, which is what Christians believe is Jesus' death. The main messenger was the Messiah Jesus, who was a Jew himself, and he believed they believe in other prophets as well. So people who spread the word of God, including Abraham, right, which is the important messenger in Judaism. And then their holy text, of course, is the Old and the New Testament, which a lot of it overlaps with the Hebrew Bible. So it's important to note that Jews and Christians, they believe in the same God. And both of these are considered Abrahamic religion. So when you ever hear the word Abrahamic religion, that includes Judaism and Christianity. But now we're going to add on to this. So let's add on Islam. So Jews, Christians, and Muslims believe in the same God. They all stem from each other. So all three of these are considered Abrahamic religions. So we talked about Judaism and Christianity. Now there's Islam. That started in 610 CE, which Muhammad, who is the prophet, had a revelation from God that year. The main prophet is Muhammad, and he is believed to be the final prophet from God, according to Islam. And they also believe in other prophets as well, including Abraham, just like Judaism, King David, Solomon, Moses, Noah, Jesus, and many more. And their holy texts are called the Quran, and it contains a lot of the same stories as found in the Old and New Testaments. So there's just kind of a background about how all three of these religions are very interconnected. So, Islam beginnings. Islam, that is the name of the religion. A Muslim is a person who is in the Islamic religion. Arab is someone who is typically from one of these regions here that you can see in the color. So it does not mean that they are necessarily in the Islamic faith. That just means they're from one of these countries. And Islam all started with a man named Muhammad. So let's talk about Muhammad for a little bit. So Muhammad was born in Mecca, which is a city in modern Saudi Arabia, in 570 CE. So you can see Mecca right here in Saudi Arabia. He was raised by his uncle. He married a woman called Khadijah, and she was actually an owner of her own caravan company for transporting goods. He was the one who oversaw the caravans, and they had one son who unfortunately died as a kid, and they had many daughters. So Muhammad would end up marrying a total of 12 wives, and he originally practiced the local Arab religion, so not any of the Abrahamic religion. It was like a just like a localized religion, which involved believing in unseen spirits and demons. And some of Muhammad's relatives were originally Christian, and Muhammad had some ideas of Christianity and Judaism. So like he wasn't oblivious to the basics of Christianity and Judaism before he started getting revelations. All right, so there we go. Now we're back in. All right, so in 1610, Muhammad was 40 years old, and he was meditating in the mountains around Mecca. And that's when one of God's angels, Gabriel, yes, the same angel that told Mary she was pregnant with Jesus, if you are familiar with Christianity. So Gabriel told Muhammad that he needed to spread the word of God. To Muslims, this is called the Night of Power and Excellence. So, the beginnings of Islam. So Muhammad was shocked. He was like, oh my gosh, did this really just happen to me? So he didn't tell anyone but family and friends about Gabriel talking to him for over 3 years. In 613, he started having revelations and started spreading the word of God. So basic beliefs preach include that souls are judged by God at the end of time. God created the universe. There is only one God, and Allah, that's just God. It just translates, Allah and God are the same like word. But is the same God as Jews and Christians. So it is a monotheistic religion, and it's a belief in prophets. Muhammad is the final prophet, and also where'd it go? There you go. And also the belief in angels. All right, so at first, there were very few followers of Muhammad. Muhammad mainly preached in his hometown of Mecca. Mecca authorities did not appreciate him preaching. The authorities in Mecca believed in that polytheistic religion, and they're like, hey, like Muhammad, what are you doing? Like, this isn't our religion in the city. And Muhammad started to get followers of both Jews and Christians. And these Jews and Christians really liked Muhammad's teachings more than the like traditional Jewish and Christian teachings because they were not written in the Torah of the Bible, because a lot of people were not literate back in the 600s. So all the religion had to be spread by word of mouth, and that's why they really liked Muhammad, because he would speak to them instead of just like writing it down, be like, here, go read it, although you can't read. B, similar or same teachings as Judaism and Christianity, so they weren't so different of teachings, so people like the similarities. And C, it came right from the Prophet Muhammad himself and not passed on by generation and generation word of mouth. So, Muhammad, he was eventually kicked out of Mecca by the authorities. He and his followers then went to Medina in 622, which is in modern-day Saudi Arabia. So here's Mecca, here's Medina. It's 280 miles away, and they spread Islamic word as they traveled. Muhammad's travel from Mecca to Medina is called the Hijra, and it marks year number 1 on the Islamic calendar. So, long story short here of how Muslims became a conquering religion in the Middle East. So Muhammad and Muslims were really mad at Mecca for kicking them out. So the Muslims battled Mecca in a series of battles. Muslims eventually took over Mecca and Medina, and they started their own government, conquered more land after Muhammad dies. So Muhammad died in 632 due to illness or fever of some sort. Within 24 hours, a new leader of Islam is chosen. That's Abu Bakr. Here's a picture of him. Oops, go back. And he was one of Muhammad's friends. Abu Bakr gained the title of Khalifa or successor. In English, we call that a caliph. And it continued on Muhammad's teachings and helped establish the writing for the holy text of the Quran. So there are 5 basic pillars of Islam. Number 1 is that there is only one God and Muhammad is his messenger. They pray 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, paying alms, which means giving food and money to the poor, and also make a pilgrimage once in their lifetime to Mecca. So a pilgrimage is like a religious journey. And Muslims still do that today. So, let's see here. Today, too, Muslims are supposed to pray 5 times a day towards the city of Mecca. If you can actually Google it, which is kind of cool, about what times in the day that you're supposed to pray, which I think is kind of an interesting thing that Google has. And Mecca, again, is Muhammad's home city and where Muhammad had a message from Gabriel about spreading the word of God. And there's also something called the Qibla, which is a compass that always points in the direction of Mecca. So you can just buy those online. All right, so the Quran, again, is their holy text. Usually it is very elaborately decorated. So here's a one of the very fancy artistic pages out of the Quran, and you can see it's gold leaf and there's ink and it's just very beautifully detailed. It is written by the people who heard Muhammad's teachings. It was not written by Muhammad himself because he was actually illiterate. So it includes all the teachings that Muhammad heard from Angel Gabriel during the multiple revelations. So all his learnings and teachings, and Muhammad had with Gabriel from 610 to 632. There's a lot of stories are similar to the Torah and the Bible, but some details might slightly differ, but a lot of them are very, very similar. The Quran includes Muhammad's night journey. This is probably one of the biggest stories in the Quran. Oops. And that is when he was divinely transported from Mecca to Jerusalem to heaven, where he was then in the presence of God. Again, here are some pictures of some very, very elaborately decorated Qurans. So, another really big thing is images of Muhammad. So, in the Islamic tradition, they cannot have statues or paintings or drawings of the Prophet Muhammad. And this is the reason for this is to stop the risk of idolizing the art. And idolizing is when you're worshiping an object, but not actually the real religion itself. Also, the mosque. So that is just the name of the place of worship for Muslims. It is equivalent to the Jewish synagogue or the Christian church. The prayer leader there is called the imam, and a mosque always faces towards Mecca. Minbar is the platform where the imam leads prayer on, and minaret is the tower attached or next to the mosque. Sometimes they have courtyards too, and mosques come in all shapes and sizes. So here's a picture of the Blue Mosque in Turkey, which is probably the most famous mosque of all. You can see it's just huge and beautiful. And also here is a mosque in Minneapolis. So they come in all shapes and all sizes. So the Hajj, that is a pilgrimage to Mecca. That is also one of the 5 pillars. So again, Mecca is right here. Here's the U.S., there's Mecca. And every Muslim needs to go to Masjid al-Haram Mosque in Saudi Arabia. It is not a cheap journey to make. Last time I looked when I made the slideshow earlier this year, the Hajj cost a minimum of $8,000 from the United States to go. So when I was in high school, I was always like, what is that black building in the middle of the Hajj's mosque? It's beautifully decorated. What is it? So here's my question to you. What do you think it is? All right, so it's actually called the Kaaba. And that is where the people are actually praying to, is this black box, right? So they face in the direction of Mecca, but this is really what they are praying to. And it's believed to be where Allah, or God, has his earthly home. So yes, there are very select few people that can go inside. Only the high up imam or the prayer leaders can go in. And again, this is actually what Muslims are praying to 5 times a day. And here's a picture of the inside of it. I was always like, oh my gosh, what does the inside look like? I mean, it's beautifully decorated, but I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. I just, it always feels like it's a big mystery, but it's like, oh, here's a picture of it. So the basics of Islam. There are 2 main branches of Islam. There are the Shia, or the Shiites, and the Sunnis. And they had a really big split up in 656. So with the Shia, um, the big difference between the Shia and the Sunnis is who can be considered a caliph or the leader of Muslims. So the Shia believe only descendants of Muhammad can be caliphs, where the Sunnis believe the caliphs do not have to be a direct descendant of Muhammad. But they both believe there's only one God, Allah, the Quran is the holy book, and they practice the 5 pillars. So, big question. Who is the big leader of Islam today? Like, Catholics, they have the Pope. But what about Islam? So, that is a really tricky question to answer. So, usually a caliphate is the leader of Islam. It's kind of like a king. And typically it comes with a government and religious structure. The last caliphate ended in 1924 with the fall of the Ottoman Empire due to them siding with the Germans in World War I. And if you've taken U.S. history, you know that Germany lost. So today there is no ruler of Islam. It's mostly locally ruled, and different rulers of Sunni and Shiite religions, and imams are leaders too because of their expert in Islamic law. So, first question for you to write down on your study guide. In your study guide, summarize the basic beliefs, history, and important characteristics of Islam in 5 sentences or 5 bullet points. I know that's hard. I went through a lot. All right, so kind of switching gears here, okay? Because we're going to talk about Argo, which is our next movie. And if you know anything about it, there's a lot of hostility between the Middle East and the United States. So the question is, why are some Middle East countries hostile to the United States today? Okay? Let's be clear. When I say countries, I am talking about the governments, not the people themselves. I'm talking about strictly the governments. So the Quran tells of how Islam is a very peaceful religion, okay? The Quran says there should be no war, there should be no violence. But due to misinterpretations and politicians exploiting an otherwise peaceful religion, there is a lot of violence and unrest. And not all people in a country are also Muslim as well, right? You usually think of, like a country and you're like, oh, everyone's the same religion. That is not the case, especially in the Middle East. There's lots of different religions. So the biggest opponent to the U.S. right now is Iran, and we'll talk about why. The U.S. also allies with Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. So those are all friends with the United States. Afghanistan, that's a very complicated thing since the government got overthrown back in August of 2021. And other countries that I did not mention here, they're mutual or it's just plain up complicated and we just don't have enough time to talk about it. So, answer this question just on the Edpuzzle. Why do you think the US and Iran are not friends? But I'll give you a hint. It does not have to do with religion. It's oil. Yeah, it's oil. If you know anything about the Middle East and the US, you would probably have known it's oil. All right, so why did the US get involved in the Middle East in the first place? So that all kind of goes back, we'll go back to Ronald Reagan, okay? So he was president in 1981 to 89. So the US really needs oil for cars, transportation, and industries. The Middle East had vast oil supplies. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union, which today we call Russia, was breaking apart, and Reagan feared communism would spread to the Middle East. So that's where OPEC comes in. And that's still something that we talk about today, right? You might hear it on the news, especially when gas prices go kind of crazy. So OPEC is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It was made in 1960 and it still exists today. OPEC regulates prices and production of oil, and it controls 4/5 of the world's oil reserves. And here's a map of all the oil reserves. So, Arab nations. There are 22 countries in North Africa and the Middle East. Mostly countries in the shaded area are predominantly Muslim in population and Arabic speaking, but again, that's not everybody. So, next question, just answer this one on your Edpuzzle. What do you know about the conflict between Israel and Palestine? All right, so we'll talk about that in just a second here. But why is Jerusalem such an important city? Okay, so Jerusalem, right here, you can see it is located within Israel, is religiously significant to both Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So as you can see here, here's like the Western Wall, very important to the Jewish people. Here's Dome of the Rock, which is a huge mosque. And then, of course, there's also some very important churches, like this is believed to where Jesus was crucified according to Christianity. All right. So Israel was formed in 1948, and the United Nations took land from Palestine and made it into Israel. But the question is, why? The reason why is because after World War II, many Jewish people were displaced. The United Nations, especially Great Britain, wanted Jews to have a permanent home, and this led to the creation of Israel. So you can see here, before 1946, Jewish land was kind of in this white color, and Palestinian land was in this green color. And then all of a sudden the United Nations came in and said, Palestinians, you're out of here. This is Jewish land now. So that's really started a big rift between Palestinians and the Jewish population. So Israel took half of Palestine's land. Palestinians are mostly Muslim, and the surrounding Arab countries like Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq were also mostly Muslims. So Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq were really angry at the United Nations and Israel for creating Israel. They're like, hey, yo, what the heck? You just stole Palestinian land and just turned it into this new country. Like, you can't do that. So that led to the Arab-Israeli dispute, which includes something called the Six-Day War. Now, I won't get into much detail to this because right now you're already on information overload. But it happened in June of 1967. It was Egypt versus Israel, and Israel wiped out most of Egypt's air force, resulting in Israel winning land from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. So my question for you, just on the Ed puzzle, is what do you think the Arab countries do because of this? All right. And what they do is they just get a lot more matter at the UN, by the way. So you can see here, so before 46, again, lots of green, lots of Palestinian land. 47 is about half and half. Now we're in 67. It's even grown smaller, that Palestinian land, and Israel becomes more powerful. So President Jimmy Carter, okay? He was president from 77 to 81, so he was the president right before Ronald Reagan, and he helped create the peace between Israel and Egypt. So in 1978, President Carter, Israeli Prime Minister Begin, and Egyptian President Sadat met at Camp David, which is a very important place to U.S. presidencies. Is a presidential vacation home located in Maryland, and all three countries created and signed something called the Camp David Accord, which provided structure for a peace treaty. Egypt recognized Israel as a country, which was the first Arab country to do so, and Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, which Israel had stolen during the Six-Day War, and they took the Sinai Peninsula. Oh yeah, I just said that. Okay, whatever. Here's the Sinai Peninsula here. So Israel took that, but with the peace treaty, Israel's like, oh, here, Egypt, you can have it back as a sign of peace. All right. If you're ever interested, I linked this video into my slideshows if you want to learn more about the Camp David Accord, but not necessary. But it's a good video, but we'll skip it for now. Come on. There we go. All right. Question number 2. I want you to write this in your study guide. Why are Middle Eastern countries mad at the U.S. about the formation of Israel? I know. That was a lot of information I threw in you. We went through a ton of different time periods, right? So we talked about after World War II, the Jewish population, like getting parts of Palestine, making that into Israel due to the UN, specifically Great Britain really forced that upon it. Talking about oil, talking about war, and of course some peace treaty. And right now you're probably like, what the heck? What does this have to do with Argo? Well, it's all these tensions that are boiling in the Middle East that lead to the rise of the rebellion that happens in Argo, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth next lesson. So Next up, you're going to watch U1-L10 Ed puzzle about Argo and the Iranian hostage crisis, and you're going to continue answering the questions on the L9 and L10 section of your study guide. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Please. Okay? All right. That is all. Thanks for watching. See ya.